Our third speaker for today is Mr. Mohamoud Abdi Daar, the international representative of Somaliland. Somaliland is an unrecognized yet de facto independent state. It declared its independence after the ousting of Somali dictator Siad Barre. As an unrecognized state, Somaliland cannot appeal for foreign aid or international support, yet in its 13 years of independence, it has formed a system of basic public administration, public and private infrastructure, held 3 elections, and welcomed thousands of new citizens. Whereas the Republic of Somaliland can control its own territory and historiography, it nonetheless does not exist as a state in the geopolitical realm. What lies at the basis of exclusion from international recognition, and what are the consequences for the introduction of one's own currency, passports, etc.?
In the first place, I want to say something about the location of the country. Somaliland is located in the Horn of Africa. As you know, the Horn of Africa is inhabited by Somalis. The whole of the Horn of Africa. During the end of the 19th century, when there was a competition among the European powers, UK, United Kingdom, France, Italy, all these big countries, came to our area. And at that time, Somalis did not have a state, although they share a lot of cultural qualities, like language. They are the same people, the same culture, the same religion, the same history. Because of the fact that we did not have a central state, this territory, which is strategically located, as you see, has been divided into different spheres of influence. Somaliland became a British protectorate. Somalia became Italian Somalia. Here you have Ogaden, which were taken over by the Ethiopians, then French Somaliland, which is now Djibouti, and then the NFD, the Northern Frontier District of Kenya, which came under the protection of the British. So for nearly 100 years, we had to go under different experiences of colonial administration. But in 1960, when Somaliland became independent, from Great Britain, and Italy also granted independence, to Somalia, the 2 territories merged. It was a voluntary merger. And in fact, the initiative was taken by Somalilanders, because at that time, we were thinking of bringing all the Somalis together, those in Ogadenia, those in Somalia, those in NFD, those in Djibouti, Somaliland, together to form, the nation of the Somali nation. So the 2 territories, merged. Unfortunately, despite these sacrifices which Somaliland made, the union which we established between the 2 countries did not work. After 5, 6, 7 years, we had a dictatorship. There were massive violations of human rights, a lot of massacres, a lot of and people suffered. And all this documented, by the Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and all these, organizations. And then a civil war erupted after the disintegration of the Somali Republic in 1991. And it spread all over this territory. At that stage, the beginning of 1991, the elders of Somaliland and the politicians, together with the people, with the participation of the people, decided to revoke the union with Somalia and to re-establish Somaliland within the boundaries which were demarcated by the British at the end of the 19th century when they came to that area. So since then, we started rebuilding, the territory, because during the Civil War, there was so much destruction by the former regime. All the cities were destroyed. Nearly 1 million people came as refugees, to Ethiopia and to other parts of East Africa. And there was so much destruction. When our leaders, re-established peace among the people, people started coming back from the refugee camps and took part in the process of rebuilding, the territory, the country. We have been successful to rebuild also not only the infrastructure and the buildings and so forth, the industries, but to also establish a democratic system of government. We put up a parliament consisting of 2 houses of parliament, the elderly council and the representative council, an executive government, and we re-established law and order and the rule of law in the territory. And our companies, came back, as I said, previously to the country, and so a process of rebuilding, the whole area has taken place. Today, we are very proud, I would say, the Somalilanders, in achieving this progress and, reintegrating our people who are in Canada, in UK, in other European countries, in the United States of America, in Australia, to come back and to resettle in their former country. And this is what has been successfully done by Somalilanders. Then we start calling, for the independence, for the recognition of the country from the international community. By establishing, as I said earlier, of course, the institutions, the democratic institutions, and setting up a responsible, government, and our people who are very hardworking, succeeded to have a reputation remarkable for the remarkable achievements in the country. So here, to make things, short also, I want to say that despite, I'm talking under the subject of new states, Somaliland existed as an old country, and Somalis, all together, because historically we were part of the, for example, the Ottoman Empire at one stage, and before that, we had trading links, with the pharaohs, of Egypt, who used to come to the Somalilands and to get, the aromatic, materials, which are so independent in the country, like frankincense, like myrrh, which they used to use, for the mummifying of the pharaohs. So Somaliland now claims self-determination. This was expressed, in a referendum which the government of Somaliland organized in 2001. And in that referendum, more than 90% of the population opted to proclaim, the new constitution, and also separation, reaffirmed the wish of the people to separate themselves, from Somalia, which is still, as you know, is in a state of conflict and chaos. As far as the principle of self-determination is concerned, the Organization of African Unity, which has preceded, the African Union, which exists now, had always two systems of applying the principle of self-determination. Number one was through the application of the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 1514 of 1960 regarding decolonization of the African territories. The second point is, through the application of the principle of uti possidetis, which is the principle of international law based on respect of borders inherited from the colonial administration. This has been applied in a number of voluntary post-independence unions which failed, in Africa, like the United Arab Republic, Egypt and Syria, which united in 1958 and which broke up in 1961. And then you have the Mali Federation, which came into being in 1960 and then was dissolved after a few years. And then you have, for example, the union between Senegal and Gambia, which became a union in 1982 to 1989. These principles of self-determination were implemented also with regard to Bangladesh, to Singapore, to East Timor, to Eritrea, and to the former republics of Yugoslavia, as you know. So our people are claiming, from the point of view of international law, that this system should be also applied, to Somaliland. Somaliland also says that its present declaration of independence is based, as she was recognized earlier, as a separate state by the international community. Because if I go back a little bit to that point, when we became independent in 1960 from Britain, a number of countries, including the 5 permanent members of the United Nations, extended recognition to Somaliland, as well as many countries in the European Union, Africa, and Latin America. But we rushed to this problem of union with Somalia, and we became part of Somalia. Now, following the failure of that union and the fact that Somaliland today is an de facto independent country, we want the international community to recognize Somaliland as an independent country. So Somaliland has a legitimate claim to independence, and because of also its admirable achievements, which are all attained on the basis of self-reliance. As far as the reaction of the international community so far is concerned, for example, with regard to Africa, to the African Union, they sent us a fact-finding mission in 2005. That fact-finding mission concluded that Somaliland is in a unique position, and her claim to independence is legitimate. And as such, the African countries, should grant full recognition, to Somaliland. Unfortunately, these recommendations are not passed or implemented, by the Secretariat of the African Union. In addition to that, for example, we have support from some of the European political parties, like the European EU, the European Liberal Party, which is the third biggest party in the EU Parliament. And in their resolution at the end of 2007, they called on the member states of the EU governments, to accord recognition, to Somaliland. On top of that, as a de facto independent country, we are independent in running our foreign policy. We have agreements of cooperation, for example, with a number of European countries, not only NGOs, but the governments. We have also agreements with companies, not only oil companies, but a number of companies with which we deal accordingly. And the press has been also in some cases realistic with the situation of Somaliland, and been writing favorable coverage about Somaliland. In addition, we have other international organizations, like OMPO, like the international diplomats, like the crisis group, and other NGOs which support, the independence of Somaliland. We have, for example, academicians, we have celebrities, we have prominent personalities, like some of the ex-presidents who visit Somaliland and who call on the international community to accord recognition, diplomatic recognition, to Somaliland. In 2012, the British government convened a meeting on Somalia. And they invited a number of organizations, including, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and also big countries, European and American countries also took part, in that meeting. And together, I think there were about 50 countries and organizations which attended that meeting in London at the end of February in 2012. And at that meeting, after that meeting, there was a communique which was adopted by the international community and which is agreed to establish a process of dialogue between Somalia and Somaliland. And so that, they would establish orderly their future relations. And consequently, Somaliland and Somalia started negotiations through the mediation of the Turkish government. And senior officials of the two governments met, and the two presidents signed a communique expressing their commitment to the dialogue. Somaliland is looking forward now to the continuation of this dialogue, which has been stopped by Somalia. Because we would like to find a peaceful solution to this problem which exists between us and Somalia. Somaliland believes itself as an independent and stable and successful democracy, that she will be more capable to contribute to the peace, international peace and security in this region of Horn of Africa, which is a very sensitive region and where problems of piracy, problems of extremism, fundamentalism sometimes take place. Somaliland is a moderate Muslim country, and we would like to cooperate with the international community, and we hope that when we get independence, recognition from the international community, we will be more capable to help also the other Somalis in other areas, particularly Somalia, where there are still fighting going on There they have a government which is recognized by the international community, but this government is sort of superimposed on Somalia. And I think this is one of the reasons where you have, the problems. In the case of Somaliland, as I said earlier, we have been more self-reliant, and we tended to do things through consultation, through the participation of the common people in reestablishing, rebuilding the country, and reestablishing security and democracy in the territory. So in conclusion, I want to say thank you very much. And just one point, if I may say so, sir, is you see how people are interested in helping, these third world countries, especially the Europeans. Problems are still raging in Africa, in some places in Asia, as you have heard. And as some people said many years ago, the European NGOs are always the conscience of Europe. And we will rely also more, not only on the governments and the parliaments, but also on people like you to help us solve, these problems. The question of sovereignty, behind which some countries are hiding and oppressing, their people, I think should be re-studied, should be studied again by the international community. And the participation, the concern which we have expressed, I think will be very important in future to rebuild a secure and an orderly society in the international way. And then the point is the role of international law. We have to strengthen the role of international law, because now there is a tendency on big countries, to put emphasis on security, on the exploitation of economic resources, and ignoring, the wishes of the people in different parts of the world.
What frames the case of Somaliland in particular is a binary. Somaliland definitely enacts de facto statehood, but is denied de jure status because of its lack of recognition. But this binary of de facto and de jure can only really get us so far, perhaps. Through this lens, polities like Somaliland continue to be framed in the negative, by what they're not, by what they lack. They are non-states, they're unrecognized. In order to adopt perhaps a more positive framing, I wonder if it's useful to set questions of legality to one side and focus instead on legitimacy. The case that Mohamoud Daar has set out so strongly is a case where there are strong claims to legitimacy. This is based on historical claims to the territory and through the everyday functioning of the Somaliland government, a democratic governance structure with a functioning economy and a welfare state. So my question is, to what extent can polities like Somaliland frame their claims more explicitly in terms of legitimacy? And does this open up space for engagement with external actors, be they states, international organizations, NGOs, that a focus on legality and recognition continually shuts down? Thank you.
I think the legitimacy of Somaliland, for recognition is its, as you said also, is its, existence historically as a separate state, especially since the 19th century, and also its capability to reconstruct itself after so much destruction and massacre of its people, and to put in place a democratic structure which adds to its legitimacy to claim recognition from the international community. We want the international community to respect the democratic choice of the people of Somaliland, who number slightly more than 4 million people. And some of the problems, as you pointed out, for example, now we meet, is despite the fact on self-reliance on ourselves, without getting much aid, from the international community, is the incapability on our part to get loans, for example, from the international financial institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, to rebuild development projects, for example, roads, bridges, the harbors, the airports. Now our people are collecting money. Even some of the girls are selling their necklaces, to raise money. And it shows, the commitment of the people, of the common people, to help themselves, to improve their lives, and to do something, whatever they can do, to reconstruct roads, the harbors, And so I think we have the legitimacy is there, I would say, finally. And also, I think it will be good if the international powers, whether they are Europeans, other Western countries, would listen to the advice of the local people. Things are not like in the 19th century when Europeans were coming to Africa. There was so much illiteracy. Now, most of these countries are literate, societies. They know the problems, and they know the solution of some of these problems. But some of the big countries will think, no, they may tend to ignore, which is very unfortunate, because if they listen to some of these problems, we can not only solve the problem of Somaliland, but also the problem of Somalia and also other Somalis, in our area. So I would say that I remember some of the European authors, which advocate that principle is, for example, Basil Davidson, who has been writing a lot about Africa, and especially the past, the history of Africa. And so you have a lot of prominent, Europeans who are acknowledgeable, about Africa, and who know some of the problems which the governments tend to ignore.